All right, the book of Esther happens between Ezra 6 and 7, or 5 and 6, right there in that region. As you go with the beginning of Ezra, remember they came back and they built the altar and they started on the temple, laid the foundation, and then they got the letter written to the king, and the king said everything needs to stop. Later, Ezra will come about chapter 7 or chapter 8, and he'll restart the rest of the building of the temple. That period there, that 30-year period, is when the book of Esther happens. And so that's what we're looking at if you're looking at when to date this book and bring it in. So it's a time in which a lot of people in the empire do not like Jews. There's a lot of issues. You know, suddenly they're having trouble raising funds. They're having trouble protecting themselves against many of the people who are around Jerusalem. And so that's a little bit of our background. Now, let's look at our characters real quick. And I hate to use the word character because it sounds like a made-up play. These are real people, but let's go ahead and talk about who all these people are. First, you have Ahasuerus. That is the Aramaic or the Hebrew. We know him from his Greek side, which would be Xerxes. And so Xerxes the first is the king that we're talking about. This is a king where, if you ever watch 300 or watch some of the older, and Salamis, you remember that in Egypt, or not in Egypt, in Greece. You know, remember the past where the 300 Spartans fought against the huge army of Persia. This is the king we're talking about. All that Greek invasion that did not go so well is the reaction of what we see happening in chapter 1. The battle did not go well. They come home, they throw a party to try to raise spirits and such. And so that's what you have here. He is not a great king. His father Darius was a great king, destroyed Nebuchadnezzar. He's not a great one. His reign will be over in about 25 years. And the next guy is a really good one. And that's the one that Ezra and Nehemiah are going to work with. All right, next you got Vashti. That is the queen there in chapter 1. She is the granddaughter of King Nebuchadnezzar, and she is the daughter of Belshazzar. And so she is married to King Xerxes or Ahasuerus, primarily as a way to say that he has legitimate hold to the throne of Babylon and of Persia and such. She's there for political reasons, but not much more. You've got Esther, and we all know who Esther is. She's a sweet girl. She's an orphan. And as you study about Esther, tradition says that the Darius II, who allowed the temple to be rebuilt, was her son, the son by her and King Xerxes. Mordecai is of the tribe of Benjamin. He is the, I don't know how many great-grandsons it would be, but he follows Saul, King Saul. And he is the head of the Jews throughout the empire. And then you have Haman. Haman is an Agagite, as you read, is an Amalekite. And if you recall, going back to 1 Samuel chapter 15, God told Israel to kill all the Amalekites. Remember, Saul was to go and kill all the Amalekites, and he killed everybody but King Agag and his family. He wanted them to save as trophies. And you remember where Samuel comes up to him and he says, okay, if you obeyed God, why do I hear all the bleating of the sheep in my ears? Well, it's because the people made me, and it's because we're going to worship or whatever. So Samuel kills King Agag, but some of his sons live, and a heritage of that is who Haman is. So there's a little bit of all the background of all the people that we're going to be working with through these 10 chapters as we go through. And so think of this, if you will, as a play that's being acted out. Because until the days of Jesus on Purim, which we'll get to at the end of this book, on the day of Purim, they would get together, everybody would give one another gifts, celebrating what happened, and then they would read this book. And as the book is read, especially the children, in Jewish tradition, whenever the word Vashti was used, and whenever the word Ezra is going to be the wife of Haman, whenever those come, the kids are supposed to throw things and hiss. And so they have a little thing that they would do back and forth. And so you can imagine as you read through it how this book is put together as a reading exercise and a pretty joyful thing as you go through it. And so it's a little different than what we're used to as far as how it's put together, but it's still pretty interesting. So, start in chapter 1. Xerxes is back. The battle did not go well. And as they come back, they decide, let's have a feast. And so they have a huge feast. They have officials from every province which is there. It's 127 provinces, going all the way from India all the way to Ethiopia. And they are having a rip-roaring great time. Now, as they all get drunk, they're sitting there and they are coming up with ideas, as people who are inebriated do. Usually they're not good ideas, but they come up with ideas. And one of the ideas is we need to have Queen Vashti come in, and we need to have her wear her crown and parade herself in front of all of us. All right. Now, as a preacher, I have heard Vashti used in many different ways, and you probably have too. Growing up, this chapter 1 was always your anti-dancing chapter, okay? And the reason, and I don't say that to be, joking or whatever else, but what people would always say, I remember preachers saying this all the time, well, this pagan had more modesty than any of the Christians who go to dances nowadays, because she wouldn't go and dance in front of everybody. And so that, growing up, whenever I read about Vashti in chapter 1, I see these old preachers telling me that and coming across. If you read anything modern, like in the last 10 years, you run across the Me Too movement, METOO, where women are greatly oppressed, and the historical nature of how they're oppressed. And Vashti finally stood up for herself, and you see a lot of that going on with all of this. Will she stand up? Will she not? And, what's her relationship and what's Esther's relationship of all the things which are going on here? And a lot of times that discussion ends up clouding over the rest of the book, whether that discussion is warranted or not. It's a very different culture, very different time, and very ungodly people compared to what we are today. Now, from a Jewish, if you look at the Midrash, which is the commentaries that the Jews do, Vashti was present with Nebuchadnezzar when Jerusalem was destroyed. She has a very close connection with all the Babylonians. Now, when King Xerxes brings her in and says, I want you to wear your crown and I want you to parade yourself in front of everybody, he is making a point. This crown is the crown of Babylon. And as she walks around, it's more or less, hey, I killed this woman's granddaddy, I killed this woman's dad. That crown that she has belongs to me because this woman belongs to me. It's one of those things of he is trying to show his power and show his authority by her coming in. And she's not going to allow that to happen. And so she tells him no. All right? Kings are not used to hearing that word no. As a matter of fact, everybody today, it seems, is not used to hearing the word no, right? I mean, that just seems the way it is. And so you can't tell the king no. And so they tell the king no, you got to be gone. And out you go. And it almost gets hilarious to me, just in the way that I read it. They're like, oh, we can't have this. Verse 18, if everybody hears that your wife told you no, then all the women in the world are going to just rise up against us. It's going to be terrible. And so they have to send out a decree, and all the way to the end, look there in verse 22, they pass a law, a man is a master of his house. And so, it's kind of funny that you have to send out a law saying that a man rules his house and the king rules the land. If you have to tell somebody you're in charge, guess what? Okay, that's usually not a good thing. When you have to tell somebody that you have that authority, a lot of times that implies, it's not a great thing. You've got an issue with the relationship which is there. So that happens in chapter 1. Vashti is gone. Now here we are in chapter 2. The king feels good. He has told everybody that the man rules the house. He's not going to let any person tell him no. And in chapter 2, he looks around and he says, I don't have a queen. I'm lonely. And so he looks at his advisors and he says, you made me get rid of my queen. And they're like, oh, wait, don't get angry. We're going to have a beauty contest. So all 127 provinces, and you can imagine just the flavors of people from all over this empire, Ethiopia to India to Arabia, all these areas. They bring in these ladies. It's a year-long project. And think more of the Japanese version of where they would train ladies of exactly how to act and how to do this and do that or whatever else. This is more of an Eastern country, and so think of that as that went on. And so that goes on for the 12 months, and he chooses Esther out of this group. And in chapter 2, verse 17, why did he choose her? Well, the way she carries herself, the way she talks, the way that she acts. And we're going to see throughout the book, Esther knows how to get things done, and she knows how to control her husband. But she knows to control her husband without telling her husband what to do. Now, there's a skill to that, and it's not a skill I have. But there's some people, they never fight with their teenagers because they know their teenagers so well that they can just suggest something, and suddenly the teenager thinks it's their idea. And there's sometimes husbands and wives can do that back and forth. You never tell your spouse what to do. You just suggest it. And, it's like when your wife says, what do you think about? All right, at that point you stop and the rest of it's a command, right? And so, you go through and then, so Esther's very good at that. And you're going to see it as it comes across. It's different than the way Vashti would act. Well, she comes in and she's chosen. And as she's chosen, as she goes through this contest, she's an orphan. So she is at the very lowest part of the empire. She's Jew, she's an orphan, and God raises her to be the queen over all of the empire. Mordecai tells her, do not tell anybody of your heritage. Don't tell anybody that you're a Jew. Don't tell anybody that you're related to me. But she is brought into the palace, into the harem. Mordecai comes to the edge of the gate to see her. And that's the only time that he can ever have any contact, and he's just making sure she's okay. And as chapter 2 closes, something is going on, and Mordecai overhears a plot by the princes that they're going to try to kill the king. And eventually this does happen in about 15 years from now. But Mordecai tells the officials about it. Those people are put to death, and Mordecai should be treated as a hero, but they forget, as people oftentimes do. It's written down, but they totally forget to do anything or mention anything that's going on there. So that brings us to chapter 3. In chapter 3, now Haman. Haman is brought to power. He is the prime minister. We're not told that, but he has the highest place in the kingdom. Like Joseph in the book of Genesis over Egypt, Haman is ruling the country. And Haman is a very proud person. And he makes a rule that he's so important that when he walks down the street, everybody has to stop and bow as he walks by. And so that's the rule. Everybody has to stop and bow all the way down while he walks by because he matters so much. Well, Mordecai sees him, and the Jewish midrash, the commentaries, say that Haman had an idolatrous thing and Mordecai was never going to bow to an idol. Maybe there's that. Maybe there's the racial animosity that the Amalekites and the Israelites had. Mordecai won't bow. He just stands there and watches them walk by. And Haman does not like it. He does not like it at all. And he cannot get Mordecai to bow. So he goes to the king, and he offers the king, he says, here are 10,000 pieces of silver. Let's make a deal. I've heard about these Jews. Now, this is going to sound just like the letter sent in the book of Ezra that made the temple stop being built. These people are very rebellious. These people do not blend in with us. These people follow their own God. Hey, they don't like you, king. And so let's come up with a day, and we'll kill every Jew. The 13th day of Adar, we'll kill every single Jew, and whoever kills themselves a Jew gets to keep whatever they owned as their own plunder. And king, that's going to make you so much more powerful and so much more great. And the king, not knowing any better, which you'll see over and over through this book, says, sounds like a pretty good idea. Okay, we will do that. And so Haman is trying to figure out how to destroy Mordecai and destroy the rest of the Jews. So chapter 4, Mordecai puts on sackcloth. And as he puts on the sackcloth and ashes over his head, he goes to Esther and he says, you got to go to the king. You got to go and tell him that you're a Jew, that this cannot happen. We've got to fix this. And so they go to the king, and Esther says, I'll go, but I got to find the right time. Esther is wise. She knows who she's married to. She knows how to read people and how to work with people. And so she tells Mordecai to go home, tell all the Jews to fast and to pray, and that she is going to take care of this issue that's going on. So she shows a huge level of bravery. She'll do this twice. In the court, the Xerxes is treated as an absolute king. And so you can't approach God. I mean, he's considered a God. You can't approach God, or God, you'll die. You know, like the Jews would say, as the Bible says, you know, any person who sees God, he dies. And so people are always scared of that in the Old Testament. Same way with these folks. And so you're not allowed to go see the king unless the king has sent you a personal invitation. So if you go see the king and you interrupt him, then you're put to death. And the only way you can go to the king and not be put to death is if he sees you and he stands up and holds out his scepter to recognize you. And so this is a huge, huge thing that she's doing. We don't get in our culture and time how much of her life she's risking. But she knows her husband. She knows the king. And so she approaches. And as she comes in, she asks for something. Now, what would you ask for? Well, Mordecai would say, you need to tell him what Haman did. You need to make sure all the Jews are freed. Esther knows better. Esther knows how to handle these situations. So she says, King, you're an awesome dude. Let's have a feast. And I want you to be there. And I want Haman, your favorite man, who's also in charge of the empire. I want all of us to sit together and have a feast and celebrate. Well, that's not a very big request, is it? So the king says, sure, we will absolutely do that. So they have that feast. That feast goes well. Everything is good. Haman is there. The king is there. Esther is there. At the end of the feast, the king says, hey, this is pretty good. This is great. Now, Esther, really, what did you want? And Esther says, I want you to come again, and let's have a feast tomorrow night with Haman, with you, and we can all be together. All right, so if you're the king, what are you thinking right now? First of all, you like your wife. Why does this other dude keep getting invited to dinner with us? Okay? If your spouse asks you on a date and says, hey, can I bring this person along? That's weird once. Twice, really weird, right? You know, it just doesn't seem to ring right. And so two things are going to go on. Haman's going to head home. Haman is feeling good about himself. Life is great. And as he heads home, everybody's bowing. He is eating with the king. The queen seems to love him. And he turns the corner. There's Mordecai. And Mordecai doesn't bow down. Haman is so angry. And so he comes home and he starts talking to his wife. And he's like, you know, my life is great. The king loves me. And this one guy, he will not bow down. He will not bow down. And so she says, well, here's what you do. You need to build some gallows. And these need to be huge gallows, way up, so everybody in the city can see it. And you're going to hang Mordecai and his family on those gallows. And that will show him. So Haman hears that. He agrees. He's like, yeah, that's a good thing. And so then he goes to bed. Well, that night, what the Bible tells us is that the king cannot sleep. Now, maybe he can't sleep because, you know, sometimes, especially when guys get older, those folks get older, it's hard to sleep at night. You know, it's kind of a tough thing. Maybe he's trying to figure out why this dude keeps getting invited to dinner with him. We don't know, but he cannot sleep. And so what do you do when you can't sleep? Don't look up your preacher on YouTube and listen to him. Okay? He has somebody read to him. And so they get the chronicles of history. You know, if anybody wants to hear anything, it's about themselves. And so here you go, O king. Here's the chronicles of your empire, these people that you conquered, these things that you've done. And they read through it. And as they read through it, they come across Mordecai. And Mordecai saved the king's life. And the king realizes, we've never done anything for Mordecai. We've never honored him the way we need to honor him. He has never been blessed. Oh my goodness, how in the world could we have forgotten that? And so the next day, Haman comes. Haman's still mad about, you know, nobody bowing down to him, but, here he is back in the king's court, going to go to dinner with him again tonight. And the king sees him, and the king says, okay, Haman, the best, most faithful, most loyal servant in the kingdom, I want to do something nice. I need to do something nice. Well, who's Haman think he's talking about? Who's been asked to dinner 2 nights in a row? Who's the prime minister? Who has everybody in the entire kingdom, except one dude, bow down to him? Haman thinks it's him, right? And so Haman says, well, you need to give him your robe, your clothes. That's a fortune back in those days. You need to put him on the best horse in town, and you need to parade him all around Shushan, that's the capital, and tell everybody how awesome this dude is. Okay? And the king says, great idea. I want you to go to Mordecai's house, give him your robe, put him on my horse, and you're going to lead him around, all around town, yelling and telling everybody how great and awesome Mordecai is. Can you imagine what Haman's thinking? Can you imagine how terrible that is to do? You can just imagine just how angry he is about all this going on and all this stuff happening and just how bad, absolutely bad it is. So Haman is absolutely humiliated. All right, we go to dinner, have dinner again. Haman is still kind of hurting, about what just happened. And so they eat their dinner, and the king once again goes back and says, Esther, dinner 2 nights in a row. Me and Haman are here. What is it that you need? What is it that you came and risked your life for? What is it that we're meeting together for? Why are we here? And Esther says, well, king, there's somebody trying to kill me. Imagine what the king's thinking. How dare somebody do that? Somebody's trying to kill me, and they're trying to kill all my people because I'm Jewish. The king says, well, who would do that? Here's Haman. It is Haman that's trying to kill me, king. And the king gets so mad and furious that he goes out to the garden. He runs outside of the house because he is so angry. Haman realizes that he is in huge trouble. And so Haman begins to beg for his life, and as he begs for his life, he gets on the bed, which Esther is laying down, and gets on his knees and starts begging, and that's when the king walks back in, and it looks like Haman is trying to assault his wife. All right, the king has had enough. The king is angry, and the king has Haman hanged on the very gallows in which he had built for Mordecai. Now, let's take a break real quick. Let me tell you about something which I believe that nobody else believes. It's a theory of mine. And I don't know why nobody else believes it, because I'm always right. And that's just ego right there, okay? Because I'm not always right. Here is my theory, okay? When we think of, well, let's play with Judas, okay? You go to the New Testament. You hang out with Judas. Judas was, let me think where I'm thinking. Good luck on that. Matthew 27, verse 5, Judas is distraught because he's seen what's happened to Jesus. He throws the 30 pieces of silver, and he goes out to a field, and he hangs himself, okay? Now, we are of the Western tradition. So when we hear that somebody hanged themselves, they don't hung themselves, they hanged themselves, we think of around the rope, hang until you die, the Old West, right? And so you'll see in Apologetics Press and a lot of other places, you get over to Acts 1 and verse 18. There it says Judas fell headlong, and as he fell headlong, all of his guts flowed forth and burst everywhere. One of those verses you love if you're a middle school boy. And we always say, well, if he hanged himself, why did his guts burst? And we say, well, maybe, they left him up there, or maybe when they brought him down, and we spend a lot of time trying to explain that. All right. Hanging as a death, as an execution method, the first time we see it historically is about the same time. About 100 years, not quite 100 years after the reign of this king, you're going to read a book. It's a Greek book where I think it's Hercules comes back home, And after he's been back home, he realizes people have been trying to marry his wife because they just assumed he was going to die. And so Achilles, I think it's Achilles. And so he goes and he takes the muses. You remember your Greek books? He takes the muses and he strangles them with rope. That's the first time we see that happening. The Norse in France, they invented hanging, but it was about 3 centuries later that they would do that. Some of the barbarians and everybody in English law. So if you have a country, it used to be an English colony, India, America, wherever, they would hang people. That's how they would kill people. All right. Now again, this is not found in any commentary. This is just me being weird. I think in the Bible, when it says, "Cursed is any man who hangs on a tree," or when it says a person is hanged, they're probably talking impalement. Let's look at some verses. Ezra chapter 6 and verse 11. Let's check out Ezra real quick. Remember, this is going to be just a few years after. Okay? Ezra chapter 6 and verse 11. Darius is issued. Darius is going to be the son of the present king. Okay, whoever alters this message of the king, alters this edict, let a timber be pulled from his house and erected, and let him be hanged on it, and let his house be made a refuse heap because of this. Okay? That looks like Vlad the Impaler. What they do is they take the largest beam. Oh, I'm Southern. Okay. Take the largest beam that they've got in the house, put it on its end, and they're going to impale the guy on it. And so I think that when we're talking about Haman's gallows, we're not talking about the Old West where you put somebody 50 feet in the air and hang them on a rope. We're talking about impaling people. Because this impaling in the Persian thought, they're the ones who invented crucifixion, which started with impaling, and eventually the Romans perfected it where a person could live a little bit longer by being nailed to the tree rather than impaled on a tree. Now, first of all, I apologize because that is really gross to talk about. So this is not a Sunday morning lesson because we got to eat lunch on Sunday morning. Hopefully you've already had dinner. But that's my view. And when I lived down in Jackson, Mississippi, I remember eating lunch with Simon Kistemacher and some of the teachers at Reformed Theological, and I would come up with this idea, and they would just look at me like I was really weird, and they would just say, well, we'll think about it. And I've asked people at Harding, I've asked people at Freed Hardeman, and they just, I don't know, I guess sometimes I think about stuff, weird stuff, more often, and other people think about other things, but I don't know. Have you ever heard that? I know that's a change of gears, and I know that's something that you can apply. Please don't apply that at home. But, just something to bring up there. All right, so, yeah, back on the thing. All right, Haman is dead. Chapter 8, Mordecai is now placed second in the kingdom. He's now the prime minister. And they can't change a law because if the king is God, God can never be wrong. So you can't change the law, but they pass another law that says, okay, you can attack the Jews, but the Jews have just as much right to attack anyone back. And so they're allowed to fight back. And so the 14th day of Adar comes, and they begin fighting everywhere. It just takes a day, and they wipe out everybody. Shushan, which is the capital, it takes them 2 days to do. And since that day, all the way up, at least until the days of Jesus, Purim was celebrated. John chapter 5, verse 1, when Jesus went to the temple, went to Jerusalem for the holiday, most likely that's Purim. And you'll see Purim on the calendars even today. And what you do is you hang out, you read the Book of Esther, you eat lamb, and you throw stuff at people when they say the word Vashti or Zephyr. So, all right, now the important stuff. Why in the world is this book here? Why did God put this as one of the 39 books? A lot of people have not liked it. Martin Luther and others wanted to throw it out of the Old Testament because the word God is never, ever mentioned. You never see God mentioned. And it's one of the few books in the Old Testament that don't bring up the name of God. And there's a reason. God's not mentioned, but his fingerprints are everywhere. Now, You've heard a lot of lessons about miracles. A miracle is where God changes nature. Man can't walk, now he can. Man can't see, now he can. Man is dead, now he walks. Breaks nature. We can't do that today. It walks on water, stops the storm. Why? All these things written, John 20, 30 through 31, are written and shown to us that we may believe that Jesus is the Christ. Acts chapter 2, verse 22, these things, miracles, signs, and mighty works were done to prove that Jesus and the apostles were certified by God. Hebrews 2, 1 through 4, these miracles, signs, and works were done to prove, to attest, as a Hebrew writer would say, that the one who speaks those things are true. All right, miracles didn't happen in Esther. They don't happen today in that way. Now, there's miracles that happen. Texas Rangers are in first place. Okay, that won't last long, but this is the longest they've been in first place since I think it's been about 22 years. So it's a miracle, but that's not a Bible miracle. What's providence? God working through events. Genesis chapter 50, verse 20, Joseph, when he's speaking to his brothers who sold him into slavery, which got him eventually put into jail, which made him forgotten and almost died, and now he's second in command, Joseph says, these things you meant for evil against me, God used those evil things and made them good so that I'm here. Romans 8:28, all things work for the good of those who love the Lord. Now, when Joseph was sold into slavery, was that good? No. When Potiphar's wife assaulted him, was that good? No. When he was forgotten and all those promises left, was that good? No. But God worked through his life to create in Joseph who he needed to be. Perhaps you are here for such a time as this. Esther 4, 13 and 14. God has worked through your life and those bad things, especially in your life, to put you where you are now for a reason. And you need to stand up for that reason. Now, if you don't, just like Mordecai tells Esther, God's going to raise somebody else up. But God has you here for a reason. Now, let's hang out real quick and run through this, okay? All these are just coincidences, all right? Okay? Over 100 people in a beauty contest. Who wins? Esther. Was she the best looking one? Well, hey, there may have been some ugly women back then. It's before Botox. But they picked her. She won the contest because God, okay? Mordecai, here's the plot against the king. That's kind of weird. He's where he's not supposed to be. Big deal. But God put this here, okay? Mordecai reports it, it's recorded, and then everybody forgets about it. Kind of a weird coincidence, but it's what happened, okay? The king cannot sleep one night. He just cannot sleep. Okay, the king has certain records picked out. Hundreds of books in his library. They pick this one and read that one to him. Haman comes into the king, speaks to him at the exact wrong time. Okay, all those things put together, if you take those 7 and change any of them, the whole book doesn't work. God is doing something throughout this book. You don't see him, but he's doing something through the whole book to accomplish what he will. All right? Okay. Thank you very much for being here. Thanks for the time we spent together.